911, do you need police, fire, medical?
My daughter's dead. She just had to go in there.
Sir, did she hang herself?
No, she didn't hang herself, but
How old is she?
around her. She's 11 years old.
Amanda Cope, a 12-year-old girl from Rock Hill, South Carolina, was discovered strangled in her bed on November 29, 2001. Tragically, her father, Billy Cope, discovered her and collapsed in shock. When the cops arrived to investigate, they found a strange scene and quickly recognized the main suspect. Hi, and welcome back to our channel. We are always creating exciting content for our viewers, and we would love for you to be a part of it. By subscribing, you'll be the first to know about our latest videos, and you'll motivate us to keep creating more content that will capture your interest. Today, we will look at the case with the most insane twists you have ever heard. Around 3 a.m., Billy Cope awoke. With shock, he realized something was wrong with his house. The hall light was turned on, and he had forgotten to turn it off before retiring to bed. His wife, Mary Sue, was gone for the night cleaning offices, leaving him and his 3 kids, Amanda, Jessica, and Kyla, at home. Amanda was the oldest, at 12, while Jessica and Kyla were the youngest, at 11 and 7, respectively. They were a devoted Christian family who had skipped their customary Wednesday church session that night because Jessica was struggling with her maths assignment and needed some extra help to finish it. Amanda, the kind older sister, offered to help her, and Billy agreed to let the 2 girls stay up as long as necessary to complete the task. Kyla, the youngest daughter, went to bed at 9 p.m., but Billy stayed up until 1 a.m. with the older 2 sisters, helping them with their homework. After that, they all went to bed to get some much-needed rest, and Billy turned on his CPAP breathing machine, which he used to prevent sleep apnea before falling asleep. Surprisingly, he was awakened barely 2 hours later by something. Billy went to check on his girls while they were still sleeping. Because Amanda's door was shut, he believed she had turned on the hall light. Maybe she woke up in the middle of the night to get a drink of water. When he unlocked the other bedroom door, he discovered his 2 younger children fast asleep in their own beds. With his mind at ease, he returned to his bed, put on his breathing machine, and immediately fell back asleep. Billy was made fun of the next morning at 6 a.m. by the sound of his alarm clock. He later said that he dreamed of the rapture during those intermittent hours of sleep. Jesus reappeared in his dream to escort his disciple home. In his dream, he saw Amanda being hauled away as he was left behind, with her saying, "Bye, Daddy." He sprang out of bed, still frightened from his vivid dream, to check on his daughters. He was filled with relief as he saw his 2 younger kids still sleeping peacefully in their beds. His relief, though, was temporary. Amanda's door was snagged on the open wardrobe door behind it, so he couldn't open it. After shoving his way through the door, he was met with an unthinkable spectacle. Amanda lay motionless on her bed. When he reached out to touch her, she was ice cold, confirming his greatest nightmare. Paramedics from the fire department arrived quickly, but their life-saving equipment was rendered ineffective. Amanda had indeed vanished. Jason Dillon of the Rock Hill Fire Department asked Billy what he thought had happened, and Billy said she may have choked on her blanket because she rolled in her sleep. Detectives arrived shortly after, secured the residence as an active crime scene, and began an investigation. Billy's reaction to his daughter's death immediately attracted the detectives' curiosity. His calm demeanor was forced, and he showed no emotion. Hundreds of detectives quickly descended on the little house in search of leads, but the residence was in ruin, with the family's belongings filling every room. Clothes were piled high on every surface, dishes were piling up in the sinks, and cockroaches crawled into the corners. Amanda's body lay fully clothed on her bed, surrounded by her books and the most recent school pictures she'd received from the photographer. After being assaulted, she was pummeling and strangled to death, according to investigators. Her body was bruised, and physical evidence was found on her clothes. The evidence was obtained in the hope that it would be used to identify the murderer. While investigating the house for clues, police discovered another oddity. After investigating all of the doors and windows, they uncovered no evidence of forced entry. The doors were all secured from the inside. This told investigators that the murderer was most likely from within the house. Billy was approached by the detective, who inquired about Amanda's death. Billy stated that her blanket strangled her in her sleep, which contradicted the evidence at the crime scene. The detectives realized they needed to delve deeper. When they checked into his background, they learned that he and his wife had both pled guilty 2 years prior to failing to provide sufficient care for their children. This, along with his chilly reaction to her death, his strange explanation about how she died, and the lack of evidence of forced entry into the house, was the final piece of information they needed in the police inquiry. Billy appeared to be the main suspect. They took him downtown to the police station for questioning. Over the next 2 days, detectives quizzed Billy vigorously. He was interrogated for 17 hours over the next 4 days. Billy was questioned for 3.5 hours by detectives on the first day of interrogation, November 29, 2001, the same day as the murder. Detectives were certain that he committed the horrific conduct as a result of their initial interrogation. All they needed was for him to confess. However, interrogation records show that Billy pleaded his innocence over 650 times on the first day. He told the officers that he loved his girls and would never hurt Amanda. He said that the only reason he didn't hear anything that night was that his sleep apnea machine was so loud it drowned out any outside noise. The investigators thought this was unlikely, so they continued to question Billy in trying to obtain a confession from him. Billy, on the other hand, refused to accept responsibility for the crime. They tried to use his faith against him, suggesting he would burn in hell for what he had done. They also attempted to persuade him that the physical evidence they had obtained was sufficient to convict him, so he would have nowhere to hide. Whatever they said, Billy maintained his denial of any involvement in his daughter's murder. Ultimately, as the 4th hour of interrogation on the second day neared, Billy requested a polygraph or lie detector test, thinking that it would ultimately prove his innocence. Unfortunately, this was the point at which Billy's life began to unravel. Soon after beginning his polygraph, the examiner slammed his hand down on the table and notified the detectives that they had enough evidence to halt the test. He looked Billy in the eyes and told him he failed the test. Billy was devastated. Following these findings, authorities questioned Billy further, wanting to know why he'd done such a terrible thing to his daughter. Billy gradually started to speak. Billy eventually confessed, though he seemed hesitant of his own words. After his initial confession, he issued a formal statement admitting to murdering his own daughter. That, however, would not be the end of it. By the end of the 4th day of interrogation, Billy had given the police 4 unique confessions, none of which matched each other or connected with the evidence at the crime scene. In one confession, Amanda was beaten with a broom, although this was not mentioned in any of his other confessions. A dream was mentioned in some confessions, but it was deleted or described in a very different way in others. None of the details from each confession fit together. Despite this, investigators accepted them as the truth, despite the fact that they believed Billy was severely mentally disturbed. The 4th and last confession was a video reenactment in which police escorted him back to his house and taped him as he described his actions on the night of the murder. As a result of his frequent confessions, Billy was eventually charged as the sole perpetrator in his daughter's death. However, after these protracted interrogations, Billy recanted all of his statements and again claimed his innocence in court. Regardless, the damage had been done, and Billy was condemned to prison without the possibility of bond or bail. The investigation seemed to be over. A year had passed since the murder. Billy had confessed to the crime, and many people, even those who knew him, had come to believe he was responsible. Billy, on the other hand, was declaring his innocence all over again. Phil Beatty, a Rock Hill private attorney, was now assigned to represent him in court. Phil admits that, when he first met Billy, he assumed the worst. His approach to the matter was to try to obtain Billy the best possible plea deal, and then put the situation behind him. Beatty, on the other hand, was shocked by what he'd heard after speaking with Billy about the interrogation method in the days following the murder. BJ was assigned as his public defender. When Barraclough arrived at the police station, he was denied admission to the interrogation room in order to see Billy, which was a clear violation of his rights. They provided a document that was supposedly signed by Billy and stated that he did not want to meet with his counsel at that time. When Barraclough argued that they could have forced him to write the note, they merely refused to let him question his client. After his fourth confession, his defense attorney, BJ Barraclough, was granted access to him. When he asked Billy why he'd signed the confession, he said the cops had threatened him with the death penalty if he didn't. Beatty was taken aback by the evident violation of Billy's rights. He was apprehensive, however, because the admissions were written and signed that this information would help his case. Beatty received a phone call from the prosecutor's office in late 2002 requesting a meeting. He agreed to meet with them, assuming it was to discuss a possible deal for his client, but he had no idea what they were about to tell him. They brought him down and informed him that the DNA retrieved from Amanda's body had been processed. And to everyone's surprise, it was not Billy's. Beatty was both surprised and happy to hear this news, because it meant that his client was suddenly innocent and that he may win this case. But what happened next stunned him even more. He was told that the police knew the DNA did not match Billy within a few weeks of the murder, but they withheld this information from him for nearly a year. This infuriated Beatty. He couldn't believe such a horrible injustice had occurred, and that no one had thought this information was vital enough to notify Billy's lawyers before now. But then he hesitated and wondered why they had opted to share this knowledge with him now, months later. If only they'd known it wasn't Billy's DNA when the final piece of information was provided to him all those years ago. He was told that he was being told all of this now because the police had discovered a match to the DNA in the system and knew to whom it belonged. It belongs to a man named James Sanders. Little is known about James Sanders' background, where he came from, or what he did before 2001. All that is known is that he was a career criminal who had already committed a series of horrible crimes. He'd just gotten out of prison and moved into the Copes neighborhood 2 weeks before murdering Amanda. He lived about 2 blocks away from Billy and his family. There is no evidence that the two men were acquainted, and they would have been an unusual coupling. Billy Cope was a socially isolated 385-pound Caucasian male. According to his attorney, he was a devout Christian who aspired to be a preacher. In contrast, James Sanders was a recently freed African-American career criminal and drug user. Sanders committed or attempted to commit 4 more sexual assaults in the 6 weeks following Amanda's murder in November 2001. Billy's attorneys realized he was innocent after learning that another person's DNA was retrieved at the crime scene. They then questioned him seriously about why he'd given police bogus admissions shortly after the murder. Billy told his lawyers that he was certain of his innocence when questioned by police in the hours following the murder, but he'd been in shock since losing his daughter in such a dreadful way, As a result, he might have come across as emotionless to them. He also admitted to making up admissions to confuse the cops. He thought his confessions would be meaningless unless police could prove them, and he didn't think the evidence would back up any of his confessions. In this case, however, he was misguided, as the police were willing to accept his confessions despite the fact that none of them matched each other or the evidence obtained at the scene. Billy was charged with a crime despite the fact that Sanders was present on the night Amanda was slain. The case went to trial in 2004, with both sides attempting to show what happened the night of the murder. While Billy's lawyers maintained that he had no involvement in his daughter's death, prosecutors identified a simple explanation for both Billy's confessions and the newly acquired DNA evidence. They maintained that the only reasonable conclusion was that both men were complicit in the crime and committed it together. According to the investigators, there was no proof of forced entry into the property because Billy had let Sanders in and then shut the doors and windows when he left. Cope's lawyers contended that prosecutors were simply presenting the evidence in this manner to conceal improper interrogation practices. Cope was said to have mental difficulties and was so distressed about his daughter's murder that investigators were able to deceive him into confessing to a crime he did not commit. Judge John C. Hayes, I also prevented the defense from presenting important evidence to the jury on the grounds that it would lead the jury to a logical mistake. The lack of evidence of forced entry in Sanders' forced sexual assaults committed or attempted in the weeks following Amanda's murder was erased. Sanders appears to have been a master at break-ins, leaving little evidence for even the most experienced detectives to find. Another critical piece of evidence that the defense was not allowed to present to the jury was testimony from a jailhouse informant who claimed he overheard Sanders admitting to raping and killing a young girl in Rock Hill. This type of testimony is routinely allowed by courts when it aids prosecutors, but in this case, when it could have assisted the defendant, it was not. While it may appear that Billy had no participation in his daughter's death, the jury did not agree. Sanders and Billy were both found guilty and charged with conspiracy, which indicates they conspired to commit the crime. They were both condemned to life in jail without the possibility of release in 2004. In April 2009, a three-judge panel from the South Carolina Court of Appeals overturned the decision, ruling that there was no evidence that Cope and Sanders knew each other. However, the South Carolina Attorney General swiftly filed an appeal, and the verdict was overturned in 2013. Cope's conviction was upheld by the state Supreme Court, and the United States Supreme Court declined to hear his appeal. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Billy's innocence, he was imprisoned. Billy Cope, 53, died of natural causes in state custody on February 9, 2017. After being charged with the murder of his own daughter, he was never allowed to leave his detention cell. We'll leave it up to you to decide if he was truly guilty or not. And there you have it, folks, the tragic account of Amanda Cope's murder and her father, Billy's, nightmare existence.
It's been a mystery for 27 years. Who was the woman who was found dead inside a discarded refrigerator? Investigators say they finally have an answer.
A recycler in Northern California discovered an abandoned refrigerator that was partially buried in a canal on March 29, 1995. They discovered the remains of a woman inside the refrigerator. Although murder was suspected in the deceased, no clues could be found. She was eventually referred to as the lady in the fridge case by the public. For the following 30 years, detectives searched for information about her identity. Rural Holt is located in San Joaquin County, California. It is located about 5 miles west of Stockton and has a population of 5,000. Holt is mostly a prosperous farming community. Other than a gas station, a post office, and a convenience store, not much else is there. Up until a horrible incident occurred there in 1995, the sleepy community largely remained out of the news. In San Joaquin County, California, near the unincorporated community of Holt, a man by the name of Floyd Lee Thomas was searching for items that might be bought and sold for recycling on March 29, 1995. He came across an abandoned refrigerator as he was ascending Bacon Island Road. There was blood all over the golden-colored refrigerator. Curiosity drove Thomas to open it, and when he did, he discovered the body parts of a deceased person within. The man was horrified by what he witnessed. Within minutes, deputies from the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office arrived on the scene. Other than the refrigerator, they were unable to find anything else that may be used as proof. They observed that the decomposition of the body was advanced, making it hard to recognize the woman's features. Along with a pillow, a sleeping bag, and a white and blue blanket, she had been placed in the refrigerator. Behind her back, her hands were restrained. She had a sock and tape with the National Industrials brand in her mouth, along with half-pint crystal milk containers, a Nokia reusable ice bag, a Glacier ice bag, a Folks fur bedspread in rust or tan, a Rubbermaid ice bucket, a blue bath towel, Wendy's ketchup container, a Kentucky Fried Chicken honey container, and a blue earpiece with a single piece of string. Nobody is aware of any DNA testing performed on these items. Even though the refrigerator was dumped there, investigators believe that the crime actually took place elsewhere. The victim's clothes, which were undoubtedly expensive, were still in superb condition despite the fact that the body was decomposed. The woman's outfit included a blue sweater, a Fruit of the Loom tee, and cuffed Levi's shorts. She additionally wore Victoria's Secret bra, colorful knee-high stockings, and a size 8 pair of Gorilla brand boots. On the victim's right ring finger was a 3-carat diamond ring with a yellow setting, and 2 pendants were discovered in her Levi's shorts. The victim wasn't aware that she was wearing any jewelry, making it difficult to identify her. There was also a broken leather necklace with a metal clasp. The remains were submitted to the San Joaquin medical examination as the next step in the investigation. The forensic pathologists, Charles Cecil and Thomas O'Neill's autopsy report revealed a lot of details about the victim. The body was identified as belonging to a Caucasian lady who was between the ages of 29 and 41, weighed 85 to 115 pounds, and was around 5 feet 5 inches tall. The victim had well-maintained nails and strawberry blonde or red hair. Her teeth were in good condition and may have undergone extensive dental work, such as amalgam fillings. Her death was deemed a homicide, and her skull appeared to have been injured, but the precise cause of death was unknown. The woman died in 1994 because the autopsy revealed that her body had been kept in the refrigerator for at least 6 months prior to the discovery. Sadly, there was nothing in the autopsy that could have aided in her identification. However, after closer inspection of the refrigerator and the items within, the police concluded that the victim most likely hails from the Northern California region of the East Bay. The remains did not fit any missing persons description, despite their search of the local missing person files. Detectives saw this as a chance when word of the case spread. The San Joaquin Jane Doe case was eventually added to the National Missing and Unidentified Person database, but little progress was made during the investigation. The exact identity of the woman in the refrigerator remained locked in time despite unceasing efforts and endless hours of inquiry. Even though there were no hints at all, her remains were eventually buried in an unknown location with an unknown name. The brand of milk that was discovered in the refrigerator led to the initial suspicion of Rasmussen. In this case, Rasmussen was at a particular location at the time since this particular brand of milk could only be found there. Additionally, like Rasmussen's other victims, the victim's body displayed symptoms of blunt force trauma to the head, but the police lacked sufficient evidence to arrest Rasmussen. Rasmussen passed away in prison in 2010, preventing him from making any more confessions. The investigation was so severely impeded at this stage that the case had come to a complete standstill. They were regrettably still a long way from identifying the victim. Before new technology offered them a ray of hope, it would be more than 10 years. The cold case of the woman in the refrigerator was successfully solved in large part thanks to the application of DNA technology. Finding clues in the case required the use of investigative genealogy, which combines DNA analysis with genealogical research and historical data. Utilizing forensic-grade genome sequencing, the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office, San Juan County Medical Examiner's Office, and Othram, a Texas-based commercial lab, collaborated to produce a comprehensive DNA profile for the unidentified female victim. The use of this technology contributed to the case's resolution and has the potential to aid in the resolution of future unsolved cold cases. Additionally, the internal genealogical team at Othram used forensic genetic genealogy to identify leads that were then forwarded to the San Jose County Sheriff's Office for additional investigation. A follow-up investigation led to the potential victim's daughter being contacted. The daughter agreed to provide a DNA sample to be compared with the remains in 2023, even though she was unaware that her mother was gone. After being unknown to her family for 27 years, the victim's identity was finally revealed through a comparison report after almost 30 years. She was identified as Amanda Lynn Schumann at a press conference given by the San Joaquin County Sheriff's Office in February 2023, when she was assassinated in 1994. Amanda, who was born on August 11, 1965, was most likely 29 years old. Little is known about her early life, other than the fact that she was raised in a small family consisting only of her mother and sister. Nobody knows how she became pregnant with her 3 children, 2 daughters, and a son, but she had 3 of them. While she genuinely loved them, she was going through a difficult period. Her children were taken from her and placed in adoptive families for an unknown reason. Amanda Diza is remembered as being kind by Veronica Tovar, the daughter who provided a DNA sample to establish that the bones were those of her mother. She barely has a few recollections of her mother because she was kidnapped from her mother's house when she was only 3 years old. She is aware, though, that Amanda wished for her 3 kids to remain together, and fortunately, all 3 of them were ultimately placed in the same adoptive home. Veronica, a jewelry designer who is currently 34 years old, claimed she had no idea why her mother isn't present. The mother of Amanda's daughter, Veronica, has spoken about the sorrow her mother felt before Amanda's abduction. The truth of Amanda's disappearance has finally been revealed to her family, but the cause of her death is still unknown, and detectives are still seeking more evidence to fill in the blanks. The investigation is ongoing, and Stockman Crime Stoppers is offering a reward of $10,000 for any information that results in the capture of the person accountable for Amanda's death. Even while we are relieved that Amanda Diza can now rest in a grave with her name on it, no case is ever fully resolved until justice has been served. What do you think about her unfortunate outcome? Do you believe that Terry Rasmussen, a serial killer, could have killed her, or could someone else have?
Her body was found at a makeshift dump site below the Byram Swinging Bridge back in 1978.
On September 3, 1978, a body was found in a trash dump in Rankin County. Mississippi. This was a horrifying find. Who was this person who was left in this trash heap with no respect? Less than 20 years later, on May 13, 1997, a researcher in Rockdale, Illinois, thought he or she had made a great find at an archaeological site. But when they looked more closely, they were shocked to see that what they had found was actually fresh human remains. What did these two cases have in common? Nothing, except that when the bodies of both people were found, the police couldn't figure out who they were. But as DNA technology got better over time, these Jane Does would get a chance to get their real names back. On September 3, 1978, an illegal dump site about a mile south of an old bridge in Rankin County, Mississippi, was where a horrible thing was found. It was a bright Tuesday morning. A young woman's dead body was found wrapped in a blanket. The area around the Byram swinging bridge used to be a beautiful and peaceful place. But on this terrible day, it became a crime scene. The dead body of the young girl had been thrown into a pile of trash without any ceremony, as if she had been thrown away like yesterday's trash. Even though the police tried their best, there were no signs at the scene that could help them figure out who the victim was. She had probably been dead for a few days before she was found. She had no one to mourn her death because she had no family or friends. The horrible details of how she died were not clear right away, but detectives did find that she had been hit hard in the head. The woman was fully naked and had nothing with her that could even hint at who she was. It was as if she had just popped out of thin air, only to be killed by a heartless person. Who was she? And how could someone have hurt her so badly? These were the questions that kept the detectives up at night. It was hard to think how much pain and suffering the young woman had been through before her sad death. The next day, September 3, 1978, her body was sent to a hospital for an autopsy to find out why she had died. The woman's death was caused by a severe blow to the head, which added to the puzzle of how she died. The doctors didn't find any signs that she had been beaten or sexually abused, but they did find many cuts on her face, arms, and back. Even though they looked at everything, they couldn't figure out what happened to cause her sudden death. Her age was the only clue they had, and they thought she was between 20 and 25 years old. Investigators were determined to find out what happened to the unnamed person who was found at the illegal dump in Rankin County. The next day, September 4, 1978, they looked all over the area. They started by knocking on doors and asking people if they remembered anything strange happening around the time the victim's body was found. But no one seemed to know anything about who this woman could be, so the police gave her a name, Mysterious Jane Doe. They kept following leads all over the United States and Canada, hoping to find out who she was and move the case forward, but every path they tried led nowhere. In the end, the case went cold and was forgotten, leaving the victim with open questions and a feeling of being wronged. It would stay this way for more than 40 years. In April 2021, there was finally a small sign of hope. The case was put into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System for help in the hopes that someone, somewhere, would know her and bring her identity to light. Investigators had been stumped by the case, which was only known as UP 79780, for more than 40 years because they had never heard of a lost person who fit the victim's description. But even with the help of modern technology and the tools of the NamUs system, no one knew who the woman was. The case of the mysterious Jane Doe seemed like it would never be solved. But fate stepped in when people from Ohio told Rankin County coroner David Ruth and his assistant Heather Smith about a case in their state that was very similar and had been solved using genetic genealogy. The officials in Mississippi were suddenly re-energized and more determined than ever to finally find out who she was. They asked the courts for permission to dig up the body of the victim, and Judge Dewey Arthur agreed after looking at all the proof. The long-dead case was about to be brought back to life, and the search for answers had just begun. In April 2022, a mission was started to find out the truth about this secret that had been going on for decades. They carefully dug up the body of a murder victim who had been buried for more than 40 years. They did this because they were determined and had a good eye for detail. Coroner David Ruth and his team carefully gathered and prepared the investigative evidence because they knew it might be the key to finally figuring out who she was. Their goal was clear. They had to get the DNA they needed to find out about the past. Carla Davis was a generous person who lived in the middle of Mississippi. She wanted to help solve the state's unsolved crimes. Carla stepped up to pay for the woman's exclamation because she cared about doing the right thing and was kind-hearted. She also offered to keep paying for the casework that would be needed to find out who she was. She knew that finding out who the woman was the only way to solve the case and give the woman's family peace of mind. Her dedication to doing what is right and her care for the victim and her family show that even in the worst times, there are still people fighting for what is right. Even though they tried their hardest, the first 2 DNA tests didn't help them figure out who the woman was. But Carla Davis and the other detectives in Rankin County didn't give up hope. They chose to go to Othram, a cutting-edge lab that has a good track record of solving hard cases. This forensic lab had already helped solve more than a dozen hard cases in Mississippi, and they were ready to take on the task of finding the answers to this case's secrets in the forensic evidence. With a new sense of hope, they tried a third time, determined to find out who she was through a scientific breakthrough that gave the decades-old case a new lease on life. From the Jane Doe case in 1978, Othram Laboratories got a small vial of forensic evidence. Even though the Othram lab team had tried to get DNA before and failed, they were still determined to solve the case. Finally, they were able to get a sample of DNA that might help them solve the case. Scientists from Othram looked into the DNA of the unidentified female murder victim with the help of forensic-grade genome sequencing. The DNA code in her bones was like a puzzle that needed to be put together, and the team at Othram worked very hard to do that. With their cutting-edge tools and knowledge, they were able to figure out what was going on with her genes and make a full genealogy analysis. After a detailed genealogy profile was made, Othram's chief genetic genealogist, Carla Davis, led the search for Mississippi Jane Doe's possible relations. Carla was eager to solve this decades-old mystery. She grew up in Mississippi and was committed to solving the state's unsolved crimes. She looked at public records, social media, and other places to find possible relatives. Carla did a lot of studies and found a possible close relative of the victim. She might have been Mississippi Jane Doe's kid. More DNA testing was done, and the results confirmed the leads to the investigation that Othram had given. The riddle of the 1978 Jane Doe was finally solved, and her family could get the answers they had been looking for. On February 12, 2023, Jane Doe's real name was finally revealed. For a long time, no one knew who she was. The woman was no longer just a victim with no name. She was Tanya Lee Wills Mullins, and her life ended in such a sad way when she was 22 years old. Tanya was born in Potter, Texas on May 12, 1956. As a child, she had a heart full of love and kindness. Tanya's mother, Carrie Coffey, taught her the importance of being kind and caring, which she kept with her all her life. Tanya used to sing a lot when she was young to make people feel better. Everyone who heard her singing said it made them feel better. Tanya's warmth and kindness made her loved by family and friends, and they continued to inspire everyone who knew her. Tanya met Jim Mullen when she was 16, and he was a student at River Road Independent School in the early 1970s. When fate brought Tanya and Jim together, they were both still young and in their prime. They met in a small Texas town where life was slow and easy, but love always made things more interesting. When they saw each other for the first time, they knew they were meant to be together. Tanya had always been shy, but Jim helped her be her best self. His charming smile and easygoing attitude made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. For Jim, Tanya was the missing piece of his puzzle. He had never felt so strongly connected to anyone before, and he knew he had to have her in his life. But their love didn't have an easy time of it. Tanya was not liked by Jim's family, and they made that clear from the beginning. They didn't like her because they thought she didn't fit in their tight-knit community. But Jim was not one to change his mind based on what other people said. No matter what, he was set on being with Tanya. Even though their parents didn't agree, the two people in love were set on getting married and said their vows. They were ready to start a life together. Tanya, the beautiful bride, was a strong person. Her strength and drive were clear in every part of her life. She stood up for what she believed in and always put the needs of others before her own. Her love for her family knew no limits. So, after getting married in 1973, the young pair set out on a journey of love and commitment that would shape them for years to come. In 1974, 1 year after they got married, Tanya had their first daughter, Tammy. 3 years later, in 1977, they had another daughter, Crystal. Tanya, her husband Jim Mullins, and their 2 young children moved to Mississippi in 1978. Tanya went missing after a few months and was never seen again. For more than 40 years, her family and friends have wondered what happened to her. But now, Tanya's story can finally be told, thanks to the hard work of forensic experts and the money from donor Carla Davis. Tammy Mullins, who is now 49 years old, talks about what happened to her family. Tammy's dad went to Texas to look for a place for the family to live. But when he came back, his wife and 2 young girls were gone. He didn't know where they were at all. He did everything he could to find his wife and daughters, but nothing worked. 3 months later, Tammy's grandma got a strange phone call in which she was told to come to DFW Airport if she wanted her granddaughters back. The call was over before she could figure out what was going on or ask about Tom. Jim and his mother hurried to the airport, which caused the girls and their father to meet at the DFW airport with tears in their eyes. But the happiness didn't last long because their father was told that their mother, Tanya, would contact him soon, which never happened. Tanya's family didn't know what happened to her until now, when investigative science helped Tammy and her family find the answers they've been looking for over 40 years. Tammy Mullins said that when her mother went missing, different people told different stories about where she went. Some people said she left with a guy from Mexico, while others said she was in Florida. Even though Tammy and her sister don't know where their mother is, they remember her as someone who loved and adored them. Tanya was very good at making them look like little dolls. Tammy and Crystal always spoke highly of their father, who always told them the truth when they asked questions and never said anything bad about their mother. They knew until the end that he loved her and was just as sad as they were. After hearing what had happened to her, her sisters chose to honor her memory by going to Mississippi on March 14, 2023 for a memorial service. It was a trip that made them feel a lot of different things, but they knew it was important to support each other and honor the woman who had loved them so much. Tammy said what she thought about the new turn of events in her mother's case with a firm voice. She said that finding out that her mother had been killed had opened a new part of their lives that they hadn't been ready for. Now that the shock of their mother's sudden exit is over, they need to find out who killed her as soon as possible. Tammy thinks that God's justice will win out and that the person who did the wrong thing will have to pay for it in the end. Even though it has been a long time since the crime, the coroner, David Ruth, has said that it is not impossible to find a suspect. No matter how long it takes, the Mullins sisters are determined to find peace and justice for their beloved mother. Tanya's unusual death left her family and the people of Mississippi with a lot of questions. Thanks to the hard work of the local sheriff's office, Tanya Mullins was finally found. David Ruth, the coroner, said he was happy with how things turned out. He said that finding out who the victim was the most satisfying part, and that the best part was that the search didn't cost the taxpayers a single penny. Carla Davis paid for the examinations and forensic tests that were needed to solve the case. It's good to know that there are still good people ready to help solve cold cases and bring justice to families like the Mullins. The search for the missing person is over, but the search for the murderer is still going on because he or she hasn't been found yet. In this case, we go to a town called Rockdale. May 13, 1997, started out like any other day. The sun was beating down hard on a building site where workers and heavy equipment were moving trash and debris from a dusty dump. An archaeologist from the prestigious University of Illinois was quietly and carefully sifting through the layers of trash and debris, looking for historical items that might have been hidden. But he had no idea that he was about to find something far scarier and more upsetting than anything he could have thought of. As his trained eyes looked through the piles of trash, they saw something strange. There, in a dusty dump in Rockdale, was a bone that was different from all the others. As he carefully took it out of the mess, he got a jolt of joy. His heart beat fast because he was excited. It was covered in dirt and grime, which showed that it had been there for a long time. He gently wiped it clean, which showed its real shape and size. The bone seemed to have its own story to tell, as if it were speaking secrets from a long time ago. But the more he looked at the bone, the more horrified he became when he realized it was a human bone. The archaeologist and his helper had found the bones of a dead person. The cops say that the remains were found on September 3, 1978, at about 10:15 a.m., a few hundred yards northeast of Mound Road and Moen Avenue on the edge of Rockdale. As soon as he found out about it, his find sent shockwaves through the dusty Rockdale landfill. He called the sheriff's office right away, and the authorities came right away. When a human bone was found during routine archaeological research in an unincorporated part of Joliet Township, the study turned into a full-blown investigation. When the cops arrived, there was a lot going on, so they blocked off the area to start their investigation. Investigators knew right away that they were dealing with a murder case. Whoever buried the body in the ground seemed to be trying to hide it from the world. The bodies had been buried without any ceremony, which seemed like a cruel and brutal act. Investigators knew the victim had been killed because they only found one bone. This means that the person had been cut up and the other body parts were spread around in different places. They worked quickly because they wanted to find out the truth about this horrible crime, and the search for answers had started. They had a lot riding on their shoulders, and the risks were high, but they were ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. The news of the finding sent shockwaves through the town, which made the police start a thorough investigation. Who was the person who died, and how did they end up in the dump? This is what everyone was thinking about. The investigation was anything but simple. To answer the mystery, it would take years of hard work, a lot of interviews, and the latest scientific discoveries. The officers gathered around the body's remains and looked at the grisly scene with a mix of interest and worry in their eyes. It was clear that something had moved the rest of the body, and the cops couldn't help but wonder where the other body parts were. Quickly, the scene was locked down, and police were called to find out more. With their knowledge and skills, they hoped to find any more skeletal parts that could help them figure out what happened in this horrible crime. Investigators carefully looked through the building waste dump, which was full of broken things, the brick, stone, and wood layers. As they dug deeper, the things they found got more horrible and scary. Skeletal parts, broken and fragmented, emerged from the debris. The Rust Craft Building, a huge 3-story building with a full basement that used to be the tallest building in Juliet, was found to be where this trash came from. This fascinating field includes looking at the bones of dead people to figure out their age, gender, ancestry, and other things that can help us figure out who they were. With only pieces of bones found, it was hard to put together the hints and figure out what had happened. They were able to find out some interesting things about the life of these mysterious bone pieces. This gave them a glimpse of the past and may have even helped them figure out why the person died so young. Pathologists were able to figure out a lot about the unknown person from just a few pieces of their bones. On October 14, 1997, the bones of a woman were found. She was thought to be between 15 and 24 years old, which is a young age. She was between 5 and 5 feet 10 inches tall and had her whole life ahead of her. Even though her remains were not full, these details gave them a sense of what this young woman might have been like in life and made them curious about her story. Since there was no way to find out whom the bones belonged to, they were given the name Rockdale's Jane Doe. Forensic pathologists couldn't find anything else about her look that made her stand out. Was her skin color light or dark? Did her hair look reddish-brown or pitch black? Like the woman herself, the solutions to these questions were buried in the ground and lost to time. Even though they didn't have much information, the doctors kept looking for answers because they knew that even the smallest clue could be the key to solving this strange case. As the investigators looked at the order of events, they came to an important understanding. Most likely, the unknown woman had lived and died before the Rust Craft Building was torn down in 1986. How did she spend those rough years, and what caused her premature death? The world around her was changing quickly because of new technologies, changes in culture, and political events. Was she just watching these things happen, or was she trying to stay alive in the chaos? As the detectives thought about these questions, they couldn't help but feel sad for the woman whose life had ended in such a strange and tragic way. When they looked into the past of the mysterious building and the rubble where the bones were found, they found a treasure trove of information that made them curious. It turned out that this old building had been used by many businesses since it was first built in 1907. It used to be a grand plant with a tall building that was hit by a disaster in 1992. A fierce fire burned through the house for 2 days, destroying everything in its path. Flames shot high into the sky, and they looked at the clouds like vengeful beasts taunting the brave firemen who were fighting hard to stop the fire. But their attempts were in vain, and the once beautiful factory is now just a shadow of what it used to be, a sad reminder of how fire can destroy things. Before it closed, the plant was like heaven for the homeless people in the area. The building was not at all safe, but people who had nowhere else to go could get out of the weather there. But it was also known as a place where a lot of bad things happened and where bad people hung out. As soon as the smoke went away and the ashes settled, the city knew it had to move quickly. The once tall plant had become a ticking time bomb that was dangerous to anyone who came close. The choice to tear down the building was made with heavy hearts, but the question of what to do with the rubble remained. The answer came from a brilliant idea. The trash should be carefully cleaned up, and where the plant used to be, a barren wasteland should be left in its place. But the rubble wasn't thrown away. Instead, it was used for something else. The remains of the house were put in the factory's basement, giving a solid base for what would come next. When they looked into it, they found out that a strange choice was made in 1995 to move the building's remains to a new spot in Rockdale. When the pathologist told them that the body of the unknown woman had been moved not once but twice after she died, this confirmed their theory that she had been killed somewhere else and then buried here. This suggests that someone had been at the factory where she was killed. With this disturbing piece of information, the puzzle of how the woman died only grew. In 2009, there was a glimmer of hope when the Will County coroner, Patrick K. O'Neill, put together a team of committed people to get justice for the victim who had been forgotten. The cold case unit went on a hard trip, putting together every part of the case carefully. Over the years, forensic anthropology studies were done. DNA was taken and put into the huge National Missing and Unidentified Person database, and the profile was checked over and over again in CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. The team even used the latest FBI technology by asking a special unit to make a recreation of the woman's face. Still, each tip was followed up on, and in the end, it turned out to be wrong. The Will County Coroner's Office and Othram, a forensic DNA sequencing lab, worked together on June 8, 2022 to solve the mysterious cold case of Rockdale's Jane Doe. The team set out on their journey with cutting-edge technology and a strong desire to solve this old puzzle. It wouldn't be easy, though. DNA testing had been tried before and failed, so there wasn't much hope for a breakthrough. But the Will County Coroner's Office didn't give up and even gave money to help pay for the new round of tests. With the help of advanced forensic DNA testing, the team was motivated to solve the case for good. The team was finally able to move forward with their investigation after a crowdfunding effort brought in more money and support from the community. The team was ready to do whatever it took to solve this long-running riddle. Even though the stakes were high and the pressure was on, the chief development officer at Othram, Kristen Middleman, knew how important it was to find out who did or was hurt by a crime. In this case, Othram was able to do just that. The experts at Othram were determined to figure out what was going on, and they knew that advanced DNA testing was the key to finding out who the unknown woman was. Using forensic-grade genome sequencing technology, they were able to get important genetic information from the bones, which let them build a full family tree. But that was only the start. Then, Othram's in-house genetic genealogy team took over. They worked hard to study the family tree in order to give law enforcement a lead for their investigation. Once the leads were given back to the police, cold case detectives talked to a number of people in Illinois, Texas, and California. After years of hard work, they finally figured out what was going on. Advanced DNA testing done by Othram had led them to a man in California named Christ O'Brien, who they thought might be the key to solving the puzzle of the woman who couldn't be identified. Cold case officers from the coroner's office went right to his house and talked to him. During the interview, they found out that he had a sister he hadn't seen since 1984. Could this sister who went missing be the woman they had been looking for years but didn't know who she was? To find out, they took Christ O'Brien's DNA and sent it to the Uthram labs for more testing. The kin SNP testing that followed showed that Christ and the women who had been found were half-siblings. Thanks to the hard work of the police and Uthram's cutting-edge technology, his long-lost sister had finally been found. On March 3, 2023, the woman who had been found in the ruins of a factory in Illinois in 1997 finally got a name: Marie R. O'Brien. Before that, she had been an unnamed victim in a cold case for 26 years. Marie was born on July 16, 1966, in the lovely town of Aurora. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend to those who knew her. Christ O'Brien, her older brother, was someone she looked up to and loved very much. Even though her life was cut short tragically, Marie's memory will live on with dignity and warmth now that her loved ones can finally put her to rest. Marie R. O'Brien was a smart and happy student at Golden Rule Charter School. Her outgoing personality and nice attitude helped her make a lot of friends there. Her open nature, on the other hand, made those who cared about her worry a lot. Christ O'Brien, her older brother, said that she was too quick to believe random strangers, which may have led to her tragic end, even though her brother tried to get in touch with her after 1984. Marie vanished without a trace, leaving a hole in the lives of everyone who knew her. Marie R. O'Brien might not have said much, but what she did said a lot. In Aurora, she was known as a real gem and a kind person who always put others first. Marie's skills were clear even when she was young. She was very artistic, and it was clear that she loved art. Her drawings were stunning, and everyone who got one of them loved it. But Marie was kind in ways that had nothing to do with her art. She was always ready to help, and her willingness to do things for other people was an example to everyone around her. It's no wonder that her friends and family loved her so much. Her warmth and charm were contagious, and they couldn't get enough of her. Marie's life was cut short by tragedy, but her kindness and talent will live on in the people she helped. But the mystery hasn't been answered yet. Marie's family and friends still have questions about what happened. Who did they lose her to as they wait for justice to be done? They hold on to the hope that the person who did this will be caught and they can finally move on. Christ, Marie's bigger brother, has been in a lot of pain because of the wait. Every day, he thinks about how and why his beloved sister could have been hurt in this way. But he is still determined to see the case through to the end so that Marie's spirit can be at peace and her name can be given justice. The investigation team is still looking for answers, and the family has never lost faith in them.